Another real simple base here, and here our focal point is a simple artillery crew. So just with one of the corn stalks and split rail fence, one tree, and that tree ends right at the top of the screen. So if you were to pull back, that tree just ends. But for your photo or for your bookshelf, it represents a full growth tree. That's one of the figures we did as an exclusive for the historian. And again, that's the same base I just used that previous photograph. Stuck a pine tree in, same backdrop, gives a whole different feel. Same backdrop, same trees in the back. You throw Saxons and Vikings in there, and again, transports you to a whole other time and place. Same thing again with some Continental Line figures. Interesting point, this particular uniform for the uniform geeks out there, when in 1779 they decided to have a national uniform, this became the Mid-Atlantic states. With the next regulation, that became the first national uniform, establishing a blue uniform with red facings for the U.S. Army that continues in some ways with the blue dress uniform today. This is the backdrop number 2, again a Moody one used for the gas alarm, and this one's probably only about 6 inches deep, and that's got just one of our scenic elements from Britain's, our gas alarm set, a little bit of barbed wire and some loose sand thrown in the front, so a really easy display to do. When I do that on a bookshelf, I often buy some of the art paper from Michael's or Hobby Lobby that's in a color close to the groundwork, and I'll cut that to lay on the shelf, so I can throw loose scatter on there, and the colored paper helps blend it all in, but it makes it easy to clean up when you want to change your display. This is a great painting. We all like the idea of Rorke's Drift and Isla Nuwana, but Isla Nuwana was an attack on a large British camp, almost impossible to model. And as popular as our Zulu ranges for the William Britton's company, most collectors in the UK in particular said, oh, I'd love to model it, but the camp's way too big, so I don't collect anything for Isla Nuwana. I only do Rorke's Drift. And that's plagued me for years since we launched the range. So we took a modern photograph of the site, and we took our Britain's model tents and photographed them and digitally put them into that and created the camp. So this particular model, believe it or not, is only 8 inches deep. So anyone's shelf, most of your shelves are 10 inches deep on your like IKEA bookcases, right? So here's a case where you can put a little bit of grass, a wagon. I've only got 2 full-size real tents and a couple of soldiers, and even many of the soldiers you see are just photographs of our product put into that backdrop. So that's a way to actually only buy a few figures and give the impression of a huge British camp. There's another close-up shot, and that's actually in an even smaller version that's only 18 inches wide that I built and sent for the London show. So it's 12 inches by 18 inches. But, you know, zooming in with your camera looks pretty doggone big. Here's a case where I took one of the 12-inch squares. This is actually one of the new Scenic Express ones that we've released. And with just that one, actually in this case I've got 2, Scenics to go. We've got 2 squares here, 3 of our Iron Brigade figures in a backdrop, and that fits very easily on a bookshelf and makes a nice little display. So again, this is a real simple backdrop. This is actually a log cabin facade, and the same 2 natives we used in that other environment, and it tells a completely different story. Last time they could have been shooting at a deer. Chances are they're shooting at a settler here. This is that same cabin photographed, now put into a backdrop. So here we have only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 three-dimensional elements in front of the photo backdrop. And again, in a foot space, this looks like a huge farm. World War I's always tough. And even though we've released some various trench sections, it's always hard to display because you always envision no man's land going on forever and the devastation. And here's a case again where it's 11 inches deep with a backdrop, and looking down that communications trench, it looks like it goes on forever. Woodland backdrops are fun to use. I like them. You can use them for Civil War, Rev War, French and Indian War. Again, these trees are all about 11 inches tall. Those are resin castings from my originals with a little bit of foliage, but they end right at the top here. And the figures' bases are disguised with a little bit of force litter thrown to blend their bases into the base. So we just take a piece of dark brown paper, put that down, put some loose elements in, and it really makes a pretty convincing environment. This is about 8 inches deep too, just a tight shot. In this case, I did it to show the powder horns and such on the 42nd Light Infantry. Those trees are actually photographed. They're model trees that I photographed and put in the environment. So the actual scene starts here, and then the backdrop starts there. So this could actually be 6 inches deep and be just as convincing. This is our winter backdrop, which is useful for a lot of different things. We actually did it for an Ardennes article years ago at Britain's when I was in Iowa. And just throwing a couple pieces of equipment and a Hudson Allen building in there. And in this case, we actually have 3 partial trees, and it looks like a really big diorama. It's really quite small. This is even smaller yet. This is actually only 1 figure, a backdrop that's only about 1 inch away from the edge of the cobblestone, and 2 wall sections. But arches and portals are just like the model railroad trains when you have a tunnel, because you're peering into something and you're focusing, and that then becomes the focus of your attention when you're looking at things. So if you have an element like that, or it's a wall or trees, that can frame your figure to become the focal point, and I try to do that for quick and dirty photos. Little round top. That's a urethane foam base with a backdrop behind it. Our new 146 New York from Britain's on there. Little round top, if you go there, it's a big clump of rocks on a hill. Kind of hard to model, and it can be very big, but that's actually a fairly small section, about 18 inches long and maybe 10 to 11 inches deep. Same kind of thing, using our woodland backdrop and just a couple of trees with some 42nd Highlanders and some loose forest litter to disguise the bases. That's the little round top used again, but with the artillery up there. Okay. World War I, this is a quick shot right after we finished it. We got so excited because we said, oh, we're going to do explosions. It'll be something different. And we've photographed some of our Britain's German infantry and threw them in the backdrop to force a perspective. So what you see is from this edge forward and in front of this are models. Everything behind it's the backdrop, even this upturned gun limber. So we've got 2 machine gun sets, and this gravel in the foreground is simply Mason's gravel from Lowe's. So you can buy a bag for like $3, and what I do is I sift it out to get all the small stuff out, and I end up with the coarse gravel, and you can put that on a piece of dark gray paper, and I call it live scenery, meaning it's something you can move, it's not glued down, and you can just scatter a little bit to disguise the bases, blend everything in. It's a real handy, inexpensive way to set up a display. Another shot of the other end. We've done 2 different World War I dioramas, and again, what you're seeing from here to the edge of the backdrop is about 6 to 7 inches deep. So that tells you that if you had an 8 to 10 inch deep shelf, you could do quite a bit. Same thing here. Here's a case where we used our winter backdrop.
Bluetooth disconnected. Bluetooth pairing.
Okay. Just 3 partial trees, a wall section, a little bit of snow scatter in the front, and a down and dirty diorama. Same thing here with the 20th Century Warscape. The actual diorama starts right at this edge. That's just 1 strip of cobblestone, which my recollection is about 7 inches wide. So you're not even seeing the full depth of it here. I love vintage style gloss figures. It's the one thing that I have at home to display. For all the figures that I've done over the years, I only display gloss ones at home. And part of the reason I like them is because you can do a stylized display pretty easy. And what I love to do, because most people aren't glossy, so because it's stylized, I can use period art for a backdrop to put them into an environment. And here's a case where I simply went online and found a great print, probably about 1807 or so, from an Ackerman's publication, and I made a copy of it, put a grass base in front, lined up my glossy troops, and I just love the way it looks. It's a simple, effective way to display your classic gloss figures. Here's another example. Paul Sandby was a wonderful 18th century artist, and I bought a couple of beautiful hardcover books on his and his brother's work. And here's a case where I took just a little section of cobblestone, put it in front of a copy of one of Sandby's watercolors that was done about 1770 or so, and took a couple old glossy red coats and put it in front. It tells a nice little story. Inexpensive, easy to do. Same thing here. Here's a case where we created a new backdrop from an Ackerman's print that was published about 1803. And I loved it, but it was a little bit small, so we actually extended the horse guard buildings based on other period paintings. And we added more troops, we moved the civilians, and now it becomes a nice little backdrop for, again, a classic gloss display. Throw a piece of cobblestone in front of it or a piece of gray paper, makes a nice little display for gloss figures. Clowns and circus figures are really hard to display and put into context. And we were commissioned to do these for Baraboo Toy Soldier Company. And these are two people that actually work at the museum up in Baraboo. And so we did these two figures, and I thought, oh, how am I going to photograph them? And I racked my brain, and I found a photograph from an event they had there where they brought out some of their equipment for a summer event and photographed it. And just by taking a print of that and throwing some gravel in front of it and putting these two figures, all of a sudden they're at the circus. So with just two figures and something that was only about 10 inches long and 10 inches high, I made a nice little display. So you can take something really unusual in your collection and find something appropriate to behind it and do a nice little display. And here's the actual character that we modeled it after. He's, I believe, the director of the museum. And here's one of the other folks that work there. Okay. Okay, so the clown was the director. Anyway, here's a case where with our von Steuben figure, we simply took a winter hut, threw a hedgerow behind it with our sky backdrop and a few leaves forest litter in the front, and we were able to do a nice little vignette with one figure. This is one that'll show up in the next Standard magazine, highlighting our press gang, and this is from a living history museum in the UK, one of their frigates. And we simply took that photograph, put our cobblestone in front, some of our biscuit boxes, and photographed them. And again, this is probably 12 inches long, but it's only about 6 inches deep. So you can do that pretty effectively. This is actually a real fun one because at Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, they've got some buildings beautifully restored by National Park Service. And I took lots of photographs when I was there. And this is one of my favorite photos because I can just throw a grassy base and everything else behind us in the photo, but it puts the figure into context. I found a period watercolor. A few watercolors survived from an engineer that I believe perished with the rest of the column at Isla Nu'uana, but his watercolors survived. And this was published, and I just made a copy of it, and that was used with some of our new Anglo-Zulu War releases. And again, this is probably a display that's about 8 to 10 inches deep. Really easy to do. This was a fairly current photograph of Isla Nu'uana, which was also the basis for our more complex backdrop that we did with the British camp in it. But again, putting the figures in an environment where they should be doesn't have to be labor intensive or complex or expensive. Fairly straightforward, a backdrop, a grassy base, and a few figures. Yeah, the Sierra exclusives in here. And that is actually arriving in Detroit on Thursday, so they'll have that soon. If you've placed a pre-order on it, they'll be fulfilling that real soon.